So we're going to do this one in kind of the negative light, I think, for fun. Today is Darwin Day, February 12th, 2008. This is the 200th anniversary of the birth of Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin is a spoiled little brat who got liked just to play with flowers and animals and stuff, and just tried to figure things out. He eventually came up with this really good idea about where life comes from and why it's so diverse and amazing. Wrote a book about it. Most of the world's actually pretty chill with this book. The U.S. is actually one of the places where it's not. I was reading about it. Let's see. In the U.S., though, Darwin remains a controversial figure. 2 centuries after the famed naturalist's birth, more than 40% of Americans believe human beings were created by God in their present form, according to recent polls from Gallup and the Pew Research Center. A view impossible to reconcile with evolution propelled by natural selection. This is off the Christian Science Monitor. Okay, first off, it's not at all impossible to reconcile with natural selection. It's actually pretty easy if you understand the history. Basically, this group of slaves escaped from Egypt a while back. They suffered a lot. Suffering clarifies the mind, and you can actually see burning bushes and stuff. And that is your brain actually talking to you and giving you the answers that you see. They wrote a book about this. It's called the Bible. It's a pretty amazing book, actually. But the thing about it is that they don't know in the Bible, or that we know now, is that there was a mutation that occurred in our species probably about 10,000 years ago. Basically, it changed the way our brains are created. The way they get all these folds in them, and the folds increase the surface area to such a degree that we started processing information in a much more, exponentially better fashion. They've actually been able to do this same thing by screwing around with the genes of rats, by the way. And they give them the folds and make super rats. But evolution's a really tough process. You can't just mutate one gene and it's going to work out. You have to mutate and then survive and continue to propagate the mutated genes. This is basically the basis of evolution. Now, the thing about the Bible, and that part of it is, that's just when people assume it started, because that's when we had the same kind of conscious minds we have now, the ability to basically process this information and build a concept of God in our brains. Now, so they wrote this down and people read it, and it's a good story. It's a very simple explanation. It's good for children. And a lot of people okay, well, that's the explanation. I don't want to learn anything else. I'd prefer to remain ignorant and happy and not have to deal with all the complexities that actually exist in the real world. That's the one, by the way, we live in, the real world. And so that's the problem. Now, if you realize what it actually is, the Bible story is actually the story of evolution, just told as if a day was 24 hours, when in fact a day with the Bible could have been millions or billions of years. We actually have really good science on this stuff, on how planets are formed, how basically I've got a nice little theory myself about where life came from originally. By the way, that life wasn't capable of writing it down for a long time, until basically in a historical time, about half a second ago. If you want to talk about days, and you want to talk about human evolution in days, they realized about half a second ago they wrote down the Bible, which translates to about 10,000 years of human history, or 6,000 depending on who you ask and how they calculate it. People argue about this all the time. It's really not that important, ultimately, because you can't go back and live 6,000 years. Maybe you might live 100, or if you're lucky, and if we get over this whole problem with evolution that so many people have and start to solve some of the problems with our minds that nature had solved for us before, then we can probably live a little bit longer. Some people are thinking 150, 200 years. Because we have pretty amazing, highly evolved bodies. We're highly evolved light. And that's the thing that people don't quite get about it. So they talk about light a lot in the Bible, but basically we have this big fusion reactor in the sun that gives us pretty much all the energy we need. And over time, this energy gets condensed. Plants do it through a wonderful process. It's pretty amazing. They're actually like these little quantum windmills, so to speak, that just kind of, as the light flies by, they spin and create energy. It's just really, really cool process, if you've ever studied that one. I'm trying to think of the name for it right now. For some reason, it escapes me. Sometimes, as I rant and I don't do my research beforehand, I forget what certain words are. What the hell is that word? Screw it. I'll write it down later when I do the editing. So that's basically the story of evolution and religion. They actually say the same story, they just tell it from a different perspective. One has a great deal more information about it, and the other one is very simple. So the simple solution is the one most people hear early, and they're like, well, I like that one, I don't like the way you're talking. You with your sciencey stuff, that's just freaking me out. So, sorry, but I mean, we've figured this out. It's not really an open question anymore. Sorry for having to say that, but it's the same story that you're telling yourselves is true. It's just a lot longer, and time is very malleable, ultimately, for basically organisms of our complexity. We're that smart. We can actually bend time a little bit. It's part of the nature of consciousness and the conscious mind, that it is our consciousness that gives rise to the passage of time. Without our awareness and our memory and our ability to process information at the high level that we do, time really doesn't exist. And I'm opening my eyes wide to make like a point. I don't know if you can see this or not. Sometimes the light plays tricks with the camera. Which is kind of what I do too, because I consider myself, and all of you of course, to be conscious light, which is why I think you're all so beautiful. But that's a longer story, and you're so highly evolved that you're pretty amazing. Oh, one thing I was going to put into this, the hand sanitizer stuff, like if you really want to see what evolution can do, we're actually seeing this in hospitals now with basically antibiotic resistant staph infections, and part of it is because of the way we create meat, so you don't have to realize that we're actually slaughtering animals to bring you these burgers. So we have these big farms, and they do a bunch of stuff and pump these animals full of antibodies, and we as humans are actually a greater force for evolution of certain species now than evolution is, because we pick and choose which ones we want. We bred all these different kinds of dogs. You know, there's really, like, without us, there's like maybe like one or two kind of dogs. One's wolf, one's wild dogs. They kind of get to a certain point where they survive the best. They survive very well, but they've been domesticated, and then they gave us their pox and then killed a bunch of humans. We did the same things with cows and chickens, and we're working on it with birds right now. When you interact with a species long enough, you start to share their diseases. And often they're very nasty diseases that animals have a resistance to, but humans don't yet. Although all of us now have resistance to rat pox and cow pox and chicken pox. A little bit. It's kind of... Viruses are here too. They're actually very highly evolved pseudo-life. They keep going. It's all... They love the energy too. They love the light. We all love the light. All of us. Even the people who believe in evolution and those that don't. Maybe we can just agree on that. And start from there and say, hey, light's cool. You guys like the light? You like sitting out in the sun and enjoying and basking in a wonderful day and just the free gifts of God, if you would like to call it that. By the way, I think the atheists are retarded too, because they just decide that they're going to define God one way and then, oh look, it doesn't exist now because we made up a stupid definition for it. And that's kind of the same problem that the anti-evolutionists have. It's like, no, God is this, it can't be that. It's this one word, and it means different things in different contexts. This is language. It's philosophy, folks. So, ultimately, there we go. Much better on the time today, so I don't have to cut it up. So I used my phone to count down 10 minutes, which is as long as I can do these things for, I guess. Which I like it, because it actually limits me and makes me have to talk a little faster and condense things and makes the point more succinctly, which is actually what life does and evolution does. Because if you expand and you've got too much fat and too much things and then a hard time comes, you don't survive and you don't pass on those wonderful genes that have lived for thousands and millions of years. And that is Darwin Day and God and evolution. Anything else I'm supposed to cover today? Oh yeah, I'll go pay the rent. Whew. Thank God for evolution.